Imagine you're standing in the middle of Times Square. You look up at that glowing digital clock, the national debt clock. The numbers are moving so fast, they're a blur, ticking upward by tens of thousands of dollars every single second. It's currently sitting north of $34 trillion. Most people see that number and feel a vague, distant sense of dread, like a storm cloud that's always on the horizon but never actually pours. We've been told for 40 years that the bill is coming due, but the bill never arrives. We keep spending, we keep borrowing, the lights stay on. So you start to wonder, is the debt even real? Or is it just a giant, collective hallucination we've all agreed to ignore, so we can keep buying things we can't afford? Here is the uncomfortable truth that neither political party wants to say out loud. The reason we can't pay off the national debt isn't because we lack the will, or because we're globally irresponsible. It's because the entire global financial system is now physically built on the requirement that we never do. In fact, if the United States actually paid off its debt tomorrow, the world economy would likely collapse into a black hole. To understand why, we have to stop thinking about the government like a household. Your family has a budget. You earn money, you spend some, and if you borrow too much for a car or a house, eventually, the bank knocks on your door and takes your keys. The US government is the bank. It owns the printing press. And more importantly, it owns the most valuable product in the history of capitalism, the US Treasury bond. Think of a Treasury bond as a high-tech IOU. When the government spends more than it makes in taxes, which it has done almost every year since 2001, it sells these pieces of paper to investors, pension funds, and foreign countries. In exchange for your cash today, the government promises to pay you back with a little bit of interest later. This sounds like a simple loan, but it's actually the risk-free anchor of the entire planet. Your 401k is built on these. Your local bank's safety reserves are held in these. When a billionaire or a sovereign nation wants to park their money somewhere safe, they don't put it in a giant vault of gold. They buy U.S. debt. The national debt isn't just a bill. It is the world's primary source of collateral. It is the oxygen in the lungs of global trade. If the U.S. stopped borrowing, there would be no new bonds. The global financial engine would seize up within a week. We have reached a point where the debt is no longer a liability. It is the currency itself. But here is where the math turns from a technicality into a horror movie. When a bond matures, meaning it's time for the government to pay back the original loan plus interest, the government doesn't usually use tax dollars from your paycheck to pay it. They don't have enough. Instead, they issue new debt to pay off the old debt. It's exactly like getting a new credit card just to pay the minimum balance on your old one every single month, forever. This works perfectly fine as long as two things stay true. The interest rates stay low, and the economy keeps growing faster than the interest. For 20 years, we lived in a fantasy land of near zero interest rates. Borrowing was essentially free. If you owe $20 trillion but the interest rate is 0.1%, the rent on that money is cheap. You can keep the party going indefinitely. But then, the world changed. Inflation spiked. The Federal Reserve had to hike interest rates to stop prices from spiraling. Suddenly, the rent on that $34 trillion started to skyrocket. Right now, the United States is spending nearly $1 trillion a year just on interest payments. Not on roads, not on schools, not on the military, just on the convenience fee for the right to keep owing money. We are now spending more on interest than we do on the entire Department of Defense. We aren't even paying down the debt. We're just struggling to pay the interest on the debt we already have. This is the debt trap. To pay the rising interest, the government has to borrow even more money, which creates more debt, which creates higher interest payments. That's what? It is a mathematical feedback loop that, once it reaches a certain velocity, cannot be stopped by conventional means. Now, you'll hear politicians talk about fiscal responsibility. They'll argue over a few $1 billion for a social program or a foreign aid package. In the context of 34 trillion, these arguments are essentially two people fighting over a nickel while their house is being swallowed by a sinkhole. To actually pay off the debt, or even just stop it from growing, the US would have to do one of two things. First, they could radically raise taxes and gut every single popular program, from Social Security to the military. That is, political suicide. No one wins an election by promising a significantly lower standard of living for the next 30 years. The second option is the one that is actually happening right now. Inflation. If the government can't pay back the debt with real value, they pay it back with cheaper dollars. If the price of a loaf of bread doubles, and the price of a house doubles, the $34 trillion of debt stays the same, but it's effectively worth half as much in real terms. Inflation is the secret trapdoor. It's a way to default on the debt without ever having to use the word default. It is a silent, invisible tax on every single dollar sitting in your savings account. So, what is the endgame? Some economists point to Japan. Japan has a debt-to-GDP ratio that makes the US look like a penny pincher. They've been zombie walking through high debt for decades without a total collapse. But Japan has a high domestic savings rate. Their own people own their debt. The US is different. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. The entire global system is priced in dollars. If the world loses faith in the dollar's ability to hold value because the debt math no longer adds up, we aren't just looking at a recession. We're looking at a fundamental shift in how human beings exchange value. We are currently witnessing the math of the impossible. We have promised more in future benefits, Social Security, Medicare, and interest than the total projected tax revenue of the country can ever cover. It isn't a matter of if the system changes, but how. There are only three ways out. We grow our way out through some miracle technology like AI that triples our productivity. We inflate our way out by destroying the value of the dollar, or we face a hard reset that the world hasn't seen since the end of World War II. We aren't waiting for a day of reckoning where a bill arrives in the mail. We are living in the reckoning right now. It looks like housing prices that stay high, despite high interest rates. It looks like the persistent feeling that your salary buys less every year, even when you get a raise. It looks like a government that is increasingly paralyzed because more and more of its budget is locked into paying for the past instead of investing in the future. We can't pay it off because we've built a civilization that requires the debt to grow just to keep the lights on. We are pedaling a bicycle that falls over the moment we stop. The question isn't, when will we pay it off? That ship sailed years ago. The real question is, how much longer can we pretend that the numbers on that clock in Times Square still mean what we think they mean? Next time you see those digits blur, don't look at the total, look at the speed. That's the sound of the future being sold to pay for the present. And the math, unlike the politicians, doesn't care if you believe in it or not.